Welcome back to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I'm so excited to be joined by Jill Miller. We were just talking about everything local, and indeed, Jill is an entrepreneur, an executive in Chicago, so certainly local to all of our listeners. And I'm so excited to share her expertise with our listeners. But as I always do, I want to get to know the person behind the microphone. So Jill, you have quite a diverse background, and I want to talk about it. Tell our listeners, introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name's Jill Miller. Thanks for having me today. I don't know if it's that diverse, but my background is really, I came out of food industry, agriculture, equipment, did that for 15 plus years. And then earlier this year, I transitioned over into being an entrepreneur. And we're focused on still the industry around food, but in two areas. One is serving companies and their supply chains, trying to understand and advise them on strategies to improve wealth equality across their supply chain, and looking at the employees of the supplier base as stakeholders in their decision-making process. Really important, I think, in terms of wealth equality and racial wealth gap. So that's been very exciting. And then we also have been working really hard to identify a couple companies to buy and convert them over to employee ownership in areas where there's a high level of minority workers, so that we can start seeding people for generational wealth. Another way.
That's fantastic. Again, I'm chatting with Jill Miller from Below the Line, and we'll make sure to share websites in a couple of minutes. But Jill, food is an interesting topic. It's interesting to me. I think it's interesting to everybody. But what I love what you're doing is that social impact piece. As you said, moving workers of color in their communities from economic survival to sustainable prosperity. So introduce us a little bit to the food and beverage packaging and processing industry, because I don't know about our listeners. I don't know too much about it. But you've been in this line of work for a while. Yeah. So what has it been like?
Yeah. So I think, obviously we all go to the grocery store, right? We buy things incessantly in packages and boxes and pouches, and everything that sits on a store shelf comes off of generally a machine, or it's hand packed, but a lot of it is off of packaging machinery. Upstream from that is a process at some point. So you're looking at extrusion or dryers or grinders or conveyance. And then you've got case packers, cartoners, just about everything comes off a machine. And I've been in that industry. It's very heavily white male dominated, which is understandable considering the history, right? Automation came in, and post-World War II is really when automation began, and we've just scaled it up from there. But it's really an industry where when you look at gender gaps and gaps in people of different races or identities moving through the system up toward the leadership side of it, there really hasn't been the opportunity from day one. So I love working in this arena. I love food. I love food safety and all the things that go into getting something to the store shelves. But I just felt like I wasn't making the impact I was meant to. I finally realized I didn't want my impact to be measured in like how many pieces of equipment I sold. Right.
I know you and your team are so passionate about this, not just spending your days, but I know your nights as well, involved in boards and volunteering, and again making that change, because it is a big picture thing. It's not just Chicago; it's talking about an entire industry. So thank you for educating us on this. Again, I'm chatting with Jill Miller, a former food packaging and processing industry veteran, stepped back this year to form Below the Line. After, as we've just been saying, discovering sort of that passion to make a difference, which is interesting. So we've seen a lot of changes in the midst of COVID. We've seen a lot of changes. Is this the time that you can make that difference, that you can bring more inclusivity into a pretty stagnant industry?
Yeah, I think this is probably the best time that's ever been seen in the industry. And I don't think it's just right. It's not just food, but everywhere. Uh, People are engaged with these topics. People are, from the investment side, people are putting money out there for social impact. Some are large scale, some are kind of testing the waters. But yeah, there is no better time to do this than right now. And I think we've even seen it. I saw a stat a couple weeks ago in 2016 of all the venture capital awarded in the United States, 0.006 went to Black females. So far in 2021, major forward movement, but it's 0.34%. So just in dollars alone, there's impact there, but it's happening. I mean, everywhere you turn, I think people are starting to look at this, because if we don't start funding people in high barrier to entry areas, they're never going to have a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I'm chatting with Jill Miller, passionate about making a difference, not just in the food packaging processing industry, but really across the spectrum of our economy. And we're going to have to squeeze in a very quick break. But when we come back, we're going to continue talking about the responsible exit model as well, which is helping transition companies to employee ownership as owners are retiring. And we're seeing that quite a bit, which will facilitate hopefully more inclusivity. So I'm excited to continue our conversation. We have to squeeze in a very quick break. But you can find out more about Jill and her team at belowthelineinc.com. Belowthelineinc.com. We'll share that again in just a couple of minutes. But again, don't touch that dial. We're going to continue our conversation with Jill Miller from Below the Line when we return on Get Down to Business in just a moment. Welcome back to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I'm chatting again with Jill Miller from Below the Line Inc., belowthelineinc.com. We've been chatting about the change making that Jill and her colleagues are doing, food packaging and processing industry, but really overall in creating more inclusive communities, more inclusive industries. And as promised, I wanted to talk a little bit about responsible exit, because you teed this up earlier, Jill, and I can't finish this conversation without talking about it. I know that you are helping transition companies to employee ownership, which is creating more opportunities. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've spent a better part of the year making sure we've got some ready capital to deploy when we identify a company within packaging and processing in the food space to purchase. And we're working with exiting owners who have a high percentage of minority workers, and we're particularly workers of color, and we're transitioning those companies to employee ownership. And it allows the current owners of a closely held company to exit responsibly and allow for wealth to be seeded for the employees, which from what we're seeing, out of a lot of there's a lot of working papers. There's a lot of data out there now that shows what the economy can look like and the impact on racial wealth gap when you start to broad base employee ownership across the U.S. economy. It's
impact. I want to talk about that for another minute or so. Impact. So this has a massive impact. Let's talk about that, because I know you are looking at that, at how this is making a difference. Can you share what you've been finding?
Sure. In terms of employee ownership, it looks like you're going to end up with, again, this is broad-based, right? But in one study and model, you see quadrupling of wealth at the lower end of the working economy. So right now, roughly $24,000 per Black family is the median or typical wealth in the US. That would quadruple. And then at the top end of that, where the top 1% of the economy would go from about, unfortunately, roughly 28 million of net worth down to about 24.8 million of net worth, and everyone else in the economy isn't affected. So on the responsible exit side, that's how we're working it, right, as the employee ownership model. And then again, on the advisory side, when we're working with larger companies, we're talking to them about what impact could reducing racial wealth gap have on their core business activities? And then how might the supply chain and their choices in the supply chain be contributing to the problem of economic inequality, sorry, and how can organizations make small shifts to reduce the impact that they have?
The supply chain has a role in this, and let's just talk about that in our last 30 seconds or so over here. So, what's your message to what role does supply chain play in this process?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of downstream effects and impacts when a large company makes a choice about their supply chain. It can affect area median income. It can affect well-being of the workers within that supply chain. It can affect a myriad of things, and companies need to be responsible, just like they're being with carbon or the environment. They need to be responsible when it comes to the human capital in their networks and in their ecosystems. People make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, Jill, I've certainly enjoyed our conversation. Again, been chatting with Jill Miller from Below the Line, and I want to make sure our listeners know where they can get a hold of you and get in touch. Can you share your website one more time?
Sure. The website is www.belowthelineinc.com.
BelowTheLineInc.com. Thank you so much for your passion, for your expertise on this complicated issue. And we've unpacked it somewhat in our 12, 15-minute conversation over here, but I certainly look forward to continuing to engage, and I'll link to your website. Again, BelowTheLineInc.com. We've been chatting with so many amazing people making a difference in their communities here and Get Down to Business, the show all about small business jobs and entrepreneurship. That's a wrap for us. Get on my website, ShalomKlein.com. We'll be back next Sunday at 6 p.m. right here, 9560 The Answer. Have a great week ahead.